They had journeyed through countless adventures together, a seasoned expedition team bound by one unbreakable oath. No one gets left behind. But in the most chaotic moment, that promise shattered. No supplies, no signal, no chance of going back. Only two young souls and one loyal dog, abandoned deep within an unforgiving wilderness. Yet the place that was meant to be their grave hides a secret that could change everything, a secret of healing springs, of nature stronger than medicine, and of a mission they never expected to fulfill. From those left behind, they will become the creators of a healing paradise in the heart of the wild. Alder Bend was the last honest town before the world turned to trees. A two-street smear of lumber trucks, a diner with a buzzing ET sign, and a hardware store that sold rope by the mile. By late afternoon, the rain above Cedar Vale had sharpened from drizzle to needles, driven slantwise by a wind that combed the black spruce into one dark animal breathing. Thunder rolled the way freight does, yards away, and somehow everywhere. It was the kind of weather that cancels promises. The expedition's convoy, 2 crew cabs and a long bed, eased along a logging spur that had long ago forgotten what maintenance looked like. Mud fanned under tires, ferns slapped doors, and the river that the map named with a polite blue line had swelled into something brown-shouldered and busy. 12 people rode inside those trucks, wrapped in Gore-Tex and intention, all of them chasing a question only a forest like this could answer. Somewhere in the middle truck sat a young couple who believed in field notes and keeping your word. Liam Carter stood a little apart when they stopped at the washout, rain pecking his cheeks, his hands planted on his hips the way he did when he refused to be steered. 29 and long-limbed like a distance runner, he carried the lean angles of field work easily. With a high-boned face Weather had already taught to squint and judge. Dark blonde hair was cropped close because Brush likes to keep souvenirs. 2 days of stubble sharpened a jaw that could lock to principle or soften to humor. His eyes were winter river gray, always reading terrain and people the same way. Measure, test, verify. A decade ago, he'd watched a small mountain town flood while contractors argued over whose model predicted it. That week had welded a quiet creed into him. Do the work, and when it matters, be the one who stays. Emily Carter stood beside him, rain beating on the brim of her cap, the hood cinched tight around the oval of a face more resolute than delicate. 27, a biologist who read landscapes the way other people read novels. She had soft brown hair braided flat against her collar and eyes the color of bottle glass. She was small the way a spring is small until you watch what it feeds. Her hands were always busy, tucking flagging tape into a pocket, checking a filter, pressing 2 fingers to her own pulse to count a truth. Yet when crises came, her stillness steadied other people. She'd grown up with a mother who worked nights at an ER and taught her that calm is a choice you make every minute. On the backseat floor with his front paws braced rode Atlas, a 9-year-old German shepherd trained in search and rescue, 85 honest pounds of muscle, nerve, and ritual. His saddle coat ran a clean black overtan. A frosting of white silvered his muzzle without dimming the copper spark of his eyes. A pale scar laddered his right foreleg from a barbed wire tangle in Utah. 2 teeth were filed flat by years of tug-line work. He liked rules, disliked shortcuts, and adored human beings who kept their promises. When he was happy, he chuffed, a soft, private sound, as if laughing into his chest. Across the water, Marcus Hale, the expedition lead, judged the fracture lines of the bank. 46, tall and slab-shouldered, ex-Forest Service with the calm of a man who has sent people into fire and brought most of them back, he believed in plans and charisma as tools on the same belt. Josefa Joe Ruiz, 40, compact as a field stove with a braid that never came loose, ran logistics with a dry smile and a clipboard tucked under her poncho. A handful of specialists clustered under hoods. Nikos Stavros, 35, a rock physicist with delighted skeptic eyes, and Professor Hare. Sana Yadav, a soft-spoken hydrologist whose round glasses fogged and cleared with the weather. Anders Holm, a rope tech from Montana, with a beard like a winter promise and hands that looked carved for knots. These were good people, capable, decent, and tired in the way teams get when weather makes a meal of time. "We bivvy and reassess at dawn," Marcus said. "No heroics tonight." The river, not caring, shouldered a log the size of a sedan around the bend and laid it gently against a snag as if setting a trap. The choreography that keeps chaos small began. Tarps up, stoves out, a line strung under a leaning spruce for wet shells to regret themselves. Liam paced the crown of the road cut, sighting along contour lines the way a carpenter sights a board. Emily walked the upstream edge and kneaded a handful of water into words. "Silty, not chemical," she said. "No mine upstream. It'll rise and spit all night." Atlas pressed his shoulder against her shin and blinked rain from his lashes. Joe and Marcus conferred under a tarp. Radios murmured. Decisions, like rivets, went in. One here, another there. That was exactly when the road stopped pretending. The clay lip under the long bed sighed and then slid. The truck slewed toward the water as if a hand had tipped the table. Shouts cut the rain. Anders and Liam jammed wheel chocks while Joe yelled, "Brake, brake, brake!" And the driver, Pete, 22, freckles, the kind of calm that people either have or don't, rode the slide until the axle kissed air and held. The message was received. "Enough," Marcus said, voice flat. "We move." Liam looked at the map and the sky and Emily's face. "Give me 50 minutes, he said. "I'll scout the 570 contour with M and Atlas. Flag at reverse. Safer at dawn." Marcus weighed the ask the way leaders do, with a scale no one can see. He nodded once. 50 out, 50 back. Radio's up at the half." Joe pointed a finger. "If it turns, you turn." Emily tapped 2 fingers off her cap. "Copy." And Atlas stood, stretching long, shaking rein like coins. The forest above the spur offered a catalog of ways to say no. Windthrow lay in shaggy tangles. Alder thickets pretended to be nothing until you were inside them. Shale shelves slanted under duff like jokes with mean punchlines, but the slope also offered seams, and Liam was good at finding seams. He cut dead limbs where they would spear a shin. Emily tied bright tape at switchbacks and wrote timestamps with a pencil stub. Atlas snaked across the hillside with his nose low, quartering the wind, pausing to lift his head and read the air the way sailors read a sky. They moved like people who trusted each other's verbs. The mountain did not argue. It simply acted. First came a tone, rather than a sound, the almost musical hum of big wood choosing a new story. Atlas froze, ears cut to points. "Down," Liam snapped, and they obeyed because some voices deserve that. A cedar the width of a kitchen table arrived crown first, pinwheeled twice, and sheared itself to blocks against a nurse log. Needles filled mouths. The air went green and peppery. The ground made a short, hard shrug. They waited for the follow-on slide that didn't come, then stood and breathed the new shape of the hillside. Dusk arrived by dimmer switch. Rain found its honest pour. By the time they angled back down to the spur, the place where the convoy had been was empty, except for tire ruts pooling to mirrors. The tarps were gone, the clothesline gone, the long bed's muddy rectangle a rumor on the ground. The river talked louder. Liam stood very still while the picture in his head and the one in front of him refused to overlap. Emily's breath came in disciplined plumes. Atlas ran a swift figure 8 with his nose glued to absence and returned to sit square in front of them, which was his wordless way of saying, "I checked, and it is so." "Radio," Liam said, because steps matter. Static answered, rich and full. He toggled the sat beacon. Its little red eye blinked twice, sulked, and went dark. Rain in a connector some engineer had never considered. Emily's jaw set, not from fear, from choice. "Okay," she said. "Inventory." Inventory is a spell against panic. Under the lean of a spruce, they opened packs and named what was true. An ultralight tarp, 6 microstakes, 40 feet of paracord, a filter pump, 5 liters carried, a quarter canister of stove fuel, a titanium cup, 8 tea bags, 3 bars, a twist of jerky, a pouch of Atlas's kibble he politely ignored, a trauma kit, 2 headlamps, 1 honest, 1 moody, a mylar bivvy, orange flagging, a notebook that did not fear weather, a pencil, and the kind of stubborn that gets called other names until it saves you. They set the tarp low and mean to cheat wind. Liam tied trucker's hitches that sang in his palms. Emily pinned corners with stakes and stones. Atlas approved by lying where he could watch the widest rectangle of dark. The stove turned water into tea, which is not nothing. Emily laid the topo against her thigh and traced the line they had just pushed and the line they would take at first light. Liam wrote a bottle note on waterproof paper and wired it high in the crotch of a cedar. Carter party. Liam, Emily, Atlas, returned 1811. Convoy gone. Moving M1570 contour to ridge. Leave sign under // He looked at it a second, then added a small thing that made his mouth set softer. "We're fine." The rain slackened as if the storm had decided to spare them a little. The forest cleared its throat, drip from needles to duff, the long exhale of wet leaves, the tick of branches uncoiling after hard wind. An owl practiced its catechism somewhere in the dark. Atlas's ears tracked invisible traffic. His chest rose and fell like tide. Emily pressed her shoulder to Liam's, not seeking heat so much as confirmation. "They might come back," she said, "and then, because she deals in truths, they might not." Liam nodded. "We don't assign intent tonight," he said. "We assign tasks." She breathed out, a tiny laugh that wasn't humor so much as agreement. They ate like careful people. Half a bar each. Tea, 2 fingers of jerky for Atlas because ethics scale. Emily wrote 1 line in her field book, a ritual she kept when plans changed. "Where I was most human today." She wrote, "When Liam said we don't assign intent." She underlined it twice. Liam clicked the good headlamp to red, then off, and let darkness do its old good work. He named their facts in order. The town behind, the ridge ahead, no signal, supplies lean but clean, a wife who would not break, a dog who would follow any verb, and felt anger leave the way a fever does, slow and definite. Survival is allergic to blame. Mourning is a tool. "We're all right," he said into the tarp's gray, not as a wish but as a plan. Atlas huffed, that private laugh, and tucked his head on Liam's boot. The storm moved 1 county farther inside the night. Somewhere beyond the black trees, the ridge waited like a simple, hard command. When light came, they would go find it. 3 mornings after the convoy vanished, the forest began to feel like an ocean. Every ridge was a wave, every clearing a false shore, and every mile they clawed from the wet ground felt heavier than the last. The rain had thinned into a cold mist that clung to skin like breath, coating Liam's jacket and turning Emily's hair into dark ropes beneath her hood. They had followed the 570 contour northward, as planned, climbing through moss-slick gullies and weaving between spruce trunks that twisted like old bones. Atlas moved ahead of them, his nose sweeping left and right in measured arcs, each inhale a question, each pause a decision. The forest here was ancient, trees so wide that two people couldn't wrap their arms around them, roots as big as steps, air so rich with rot and life that it almost hummed. There was no sign of the team, no boot prints, no dropped gear, no path carved by human stubbornness. Just silence and the endless pulse of nature reclaiming itself. By the fifth day, their supplies were shrinking to arithmetic: 2 protein bars, a few ounces of jerky, a handful of tea leaves. Liam had started marking trees with orange flagging in case they circled back on themselves, but the deeper they pressed into the wilderness, the clearer it became. They were alone here. On the morning of the 6th day, Atlas changed. He stopped ranging ahead and began sticking close, stopping frequently to sniff the same patch of air, hackles slightly raised. When Liam crouched and whispered, "What is it, boy?" Atlas gave a soft chuff and set off at a brisk, deliberate pace. They followed, through a maze of underbrush, across a shallow stream where cold water bit at their ankles, over a rise choked with ferns that slapped their thighs as they pushed through. And then, without warning, the forest opened. The clearing looked as if it had been cut into the earth by an axe older than memory. At its center, wrapped in a net of ivy and moss, stood a building, or what remained of one. The roof had partially collapsed, and one corner leaned heavily into the soil, but the walls still bore traces of faded paint and rusted signage. It was small, no larger than a one-room schoolhouse, and rectangular, with an exterior built from thick, weathered pine planks and a chimney that had long since crumbled to rubble. A bent metal plate nailed above the doorway bore a single word, nearly illegible beneath rust: USGS, Cedar Vale Research Station, Est 1952. Emily's breath caught. "This wasn't on any of the survey maps," she murmured. Liam wiped dirt from a metal doorframe and stared at the words. "50s," he said softly. "This place is older than my parents." The door groaned when they pushed it open. Inside, time had layered itself thick and unbothered. Dust furred every surface, and the smell was a complex chord of mildew, paper, and something faintly metallic. A heavy oak workbench ran along one wall, scarred by decades of chisels and core, samples. Shelves sagged under the weight of glass jars, rock specimens, and rusted tools. A rotary phone hung dead on the wall, its cord coiled like a forgotten snake. In the far corner, a steel filing cabinet squatted beneath a window clogged with ivy. "Home sweet home," Liam said, voice hollow but edged with hope. They set about taking stock. The roof leaked, but not badly. A wood-burning stove still stood intact near the center, its flue capped but not broken. 2 metal cots, rusted but usable, leaned against the far wall, and most valuable of all, behind the bench, a row of filing drawers still held papers, yellowed, brittle, but legible. Emily pulled one free, scanning with her flashlight. Daily seismic readings 1953, mineral composition analysis, weather logs. She flipped through more pages, lips moving silently. Then her brow furrowed. "Liam, look at this." It was a leather-bound field journal, its cover stiff with age and scrawled with the name Dr. Harold Levingston. The handwriting inside was crisp, almost elegant, the letters looping like careful thought. Dr. Levingston, as the journal revealed, had been the lead geochemist stationed here in the mid-20th century. He wrote of strange mineral concentrations deep beneath the valley floor, of magnetic anomalies, and, most curious of all, of thermal springs that surfaced briefly and then vanished again like ghosts. "Local fauna exhibit accelerated wound recovery," one entry read. Another, trace elements unlike any known in region, potential therapeutic properties. And finally, near the end, project halted, funding redirected, team evacuated, springs unverified. Emily's mind raced. Healing springs? This is decades before the first clinical work on geothermal bioactivity. Liam flipped to the last page. There was a crude map, hand-drawn and faded, showing the outpost, the ridgeline, and an X deep within the valley. He was close, Liam said. He just didn't have the tech or the time. Atlas had been pacing the perimeter while they read, nose low, tail rigid. Now he stopped and stared at a dark corner near the back wall. Liam followed his gaze. A trapdoor, half buried under a layer of debris, lay there unnoticed until now. They cleared the junk away and pried it open. A steep wooden staircase dropped into darkness. The cellar was colder than the surface and smelled faintly of oil and iron. Shelves lined the walls, holding rows of preserved samples, soil cores, mineral vials, even sealed jars of dried plant material labeled by Latin names. Against one wall, an old generator sat silent, its fuel long gone. And at the far end, beneath a tarp stiff with age, lay a wooden crate stamped USGS Property, Experimental Equipment. Inside were instruments, a pressure drill, a field spectrometer, and a battered but intact geothermal probe. Liam laughed softly, the sound equal parts disbelief and triumph. "We're not just lost anymore," he said. "We're standing on someone else's unfinished work." They worked the rest of the afternoon cleaning the space, sealing gaps with branches and tarps, clearing debris from the trapdoor. By dusk, the outpost felt less like a tomb and more like a shelter. Primitive, yes, but defensible. Emily organized the field notes into piles by date and subject. Liam rigged a makeshift water collection system using the gutter and an old steel bucket. Atlas lay by the door, alert but oddly focused, ears twitching toward the forest beyond. That night, as wind combed the clearing and the stove clicked softly with expanding metal, they pored over Livingston's journal by the light of a headlamp. Emily traced the map's faint lines with her fingertip. "If this spring is real, it could change everything," she said. Liam nodded. "It's a chance, maybe more than that." Atlas stirred and walked to the window, nose pressed to the cool glass. Somewhere out there, deeper in the valley, something had captured his attention. "Do you think he knows where it is?" Emily asked, half joking. Liam looked at the dog's silhouette, steady and intent. "I think he knows more than we do," he replied. And with that, the decision made itself. Tomorrow, they would follow Atlas. Tomorrow, they would search for the spring. The morning after they discovered Dr. Livingston's journal, the forest felt different. Less like a maze and more like a conversation waiting to happen. Dawn came gray and hushed, a ribbon of light sliding through the moss-draped branches as if even the sun were cautious here. The rain had finally broken, leaving the air crisp and wet, carrying the scent of pine and iron-rich earth. Atlas was restless before sunrise. He paced the length of the cabin, pausing often at the door, nose twitching at a scent that neither Liam nor Emily could sense. When Liam shouldered his pack and clipped the geothermal probe to his belt, the dog pressed forward as though impatient to leave. "He's got a destination," Emily said, zipping her jacket. "Then let's follow," Liam replied. They set off with Atlas leading, weaving deeper into the heart of Cedar Vale. The terrain grew wilder the farther they went. Ferns waist-high, lichens like lace over fallen logs, and the faint hum of unseen streams whispering below the soil. Atlas moved with unusual purpose. Every so often he stopped to sniff the air, head tilting slightly before veering off in a new direction. It was as if something far beneath the ground was calling to him. 2 hours passed before they began to notice changes. The air grew warmer, humid even. Steam rose faintly from cracks between stones. And then, the forest opened into a hollow, a bowl of rock and moss hidden like a secret between steep ridges. At its center bubbled a pool of water, perfectly round and rimmed with mineral deposits white as bone. Steam drifted lazily from its surface. The pool wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across, but the air around it was warmer by several degrees, and the smell was faintly metallic, with a trace of sulfur. Atlas approached the edge and sat, eyes fixed on the rippling surface. Emily crouched and dipped a gloved hand into the water. "It's hot," she said. "Easily 110 degrees Fahrenheit." Liam knelt beside her, pulling out the field spectrometer. The readings blinked across the display. High concentrations of silica, lithium, and trace elements he didn't recognize. "This isn't just geothermal water," he murmured. "This is chemistry I've never seen." Emily had been struggling for days with mild hypothermia from their long exposure to cold rain. Her fingertips had gone numb, and her breathing had grown shallow. Now, drawn by instinct or desperation, she peeled off her boots and socks and lowered her feet into the pool. A sigh escaped her lips. The heat seeped into her skin, traveling upward, untangling the stiffness from her legs. Encouraged, she waded in deeper until the water reached her waist. "It's incredible," she whispered. "It's like every cell in my body is waking up." Liam watched, concerned but fascinated. Within 20 minutes, the blue tinge that had lingered under her fingernails faded. Her hands warmed, color returned to her cheeks, and the tremors ends, her shoulders stilled. "Emily," he said softly, "you're stabilizing faster than you should. Way faster." They spent the next several hours studying the spring. Liam took samples from different depths, noting how the chemical composition shifted slightly the deeper he went. Emily collected small fragments of mineral from the pool's rim, scraping them carefully into specimen bags. Atlas patrolled the perimeter with military precision, ears pricked and body tense, as if guarding something sacred. And then they noticed something stranger still. Animal tracks, fresh ones, leading toward the water. A fox with a limp paw, a deer with a scarred flank, even a black bear's massive prints circling the spring. All signs pointed to the same behavior. Creatures were seeking this water. "This isn't just a hot spring," Emily said. "It's a healing ground." Liam nodded, gaze fixed on the rippling surface. Livingston was right. He was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. They marked the coordinates and began cataloging the site. Over the following days, they returned again and again, testing different sections of the pool and mapping the surrounding hydrothermal network. They discovered that the water temperature varied subtly at certain points, and each variation carried a slightly different mineral signature. One section was rich in calcium and manganese, ideal for bone and joint health. Another showed high boron and zinc levels, elements known to support skin regeneration. Another, deeper pocket carried trace amounts of rare earth metals that might influence neural recovery. It was as if the earth itself had built a pharmacy beneath the soil. The phenomenon wasn't just scientific, it was deeply personal. Emily's recovery continued beyond what medicine could explain. Her circulation improved. Old scars from childhood accidents faded slightly. She slept deeper, woke clearer. Liam, curious, soaked his aching hands, raw from climbing and clearing debris, and within a day the inflammation vanished. Even Atlas, who had developed a slight limp from an old tendon injury, began bounding across the forest floor with the carefree energy of a dog half his age. It was on the 5th visit to the spring that they encountered their first living witness to its power. As they approached the clearing, Atlas stopped dead, his body rigid. Across the pool, a massive elk stood with one foreleg lifted delicately off the ground. It was an old bull, judging by the gray in its coat and the chipped tines of its antlers. A long scar split the fur along its flank, a wound that should have hobbled it. Yet as they watched in silence, the elk stepped gingerly into the water, lowered itself, and stood chest deep. Steam curled around its body. After a few moments it moved again, more firmly now, the limp gone. It paused to look at them, calm, unafraid, before vanishing into the trees. Neither Liam nor Emily spoke for a long time. The silence between them was heavier than words. Finally, Emily whispered, "The forest knows about this. It's been using it long before we came." Liam nodded. "Then we're not discovering it," he said. "We're joining a secret that was never ours to begin with." They named the place the Clinic of Nature, a phrase that felt both poetic and scientifically honest. It wasn't theirs to claim, but it was theirs to protect, to study, and to understand. They built a small perimeter around the site using fallen logs and flagging tape to deter accidental contamination. Liam constructed a rudimentary temperature monitoring rig using salvaged components from the old research station. Emily began logging every species they saw approach the spring, building a catalog of visitors that read like a list of the valley's hidden inhabitants. At night, as they sat by the stove in the outpost reading over their notes, they talked about what it all meant. Emily believed the spring's mineral composition hinted at a deep geothermal vent system far beneath Cedar Vale, something untouched and ancient, possibly millions of years old. Liam speculated that tectonic microfractures in the bedrock allowed water to circulate through rare mineral veins, enriching it with compounds never before recorded in surface springs. Whatever the mechanism, they both knew one thing. They had stumbled onto something that could reshape the future of medicine. But more importantly, they had found a reason to keep going. They had come to Cedar Vale chasing data. Now they were chasing a miracle. The days following their discovery of the healing spring passed with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since the storm had stranded them, Liam and Emily Carter stopped thinking about when they might be rescued and started asking how they would live here if rescue never came. The decision wasn't made in one dramatic moment, but crept in gradually, over cups of pine needle tea by the fire, in quiet conversations before sleep, and through the unspoken understanding that the forest was no longer just a place they were trying to survive. It was becoming home. The research outpost, a squat wooden structure built in the 1950s and long since surrendered to time, was their starting point. The roof still sagged in two places from decades of neglect, and the walls were lined with rotted insulation that smelled of mildew and mouse nests. But the foundation was solid, the metal frame beneath the floor still strong. "We can make this work," Liam said one morning, standing before the building with a makeshift plan drawn in the dirt. "If we treat this like a long-term project instead of a temporary shelter, we might actually build a life here." Emily agreed, her practical nature already organizing tasks into priorities. Atlas trotted between them, his black and tan coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The 6-year-old German shepherd had become more than a companion. He was their scout, their guardian, and often their problem solver. That morning, he'd returned from one of his solo forays into the woods carrying a piece of rusted steel pipe in his jaws, evidence that somewhere nearby was the supply cache mentioned in Dr. Livingston's journal. Their first challenge was the roof. Liam scavenged fallen branches and split them into beams, using a hand axe from the Outpost's storage shed. He remembered his grandfather, a carpenter from Maine, who had taught him how to brace a frame without nails, valuable knowledge when hardware was scarce. Emily climbed onto the roof with him, her green field jacket flecked with pine sap, her long brown hair tied back beneath a wool cap. Together they stripped away the decayed layers of shingles, patching the gaps with sheets of corrugated metal scavenged from an abandoned weather station a few miles away. When rain came 2 nights later, the leaks that had once turned their sleeping quarters into puddles stayed mercifully dry. Next came water. The healing spring was too far from the outpost to rely on daily trips with buckets, and the steep terrain made carrying heavy loads dangerous. Using old copper piping Atlas had led them to, Liam engineered a gravity-fed channel that redirected a small branch of the spring into a holding tank near the cabin. Emily built a primitive filtration system from charcoal, sand, and pebbles, refining it until the water ran clear and tasted clean. The system wasn't sophisticated, but it worked. And for the first time since being abandoned, they had a dependable source of fresh water. Cooking had been another persistent problem. Their initial diet of foraged roots and preserved rations was barely sustainable, and without a reliable heat source, preparing food was difficult. Emily solved the problem by converting an old metal barrel into a wood-burning stove. She cut a small hatch for fuel, attached a salvaged flue pipe to vent the smoke, and sealed the joints with clay. The first fire they built in it roared warmly, heating the cabin and filling the air with the rich scent of spruce wood. "It's not much," she said, stirring a pot of soup made from wild leeks and dried beans. "But it's starting to feel like a home." Atlas, as always, was their silent partner in these efforts. One morning he led them deep into a grove of cedar trees, stopping beside a partially buried metal container. Inside, they found exactly what they needed: a solar battery array, 2 still functional panels, and a dusty but serviceable medical kit. It was clear now that Livingston and his team had prepared for long-term habitation. They had simply never returned. Liam mounted the panels on the roof and connected them to a crude wiring system, providing enough power to charge their headlamps and operate a small electric water pump. At night, the soft glow of LED lanterns replaced their flickering firelight. As their infrastructure improved, their ambitions grew. Emily, whose childhood had been spent on a small farm in Oregon, cleared a patch of ground near the outpost and began planting seeds salvaged from their ration packs: beans, carrots, and kale. The soil was rocky but rich, and when she mixed in mineral-rich sediment from the spring, the plants responded almost overnight. "If we're here through winter," she said, "we'll need more than canned rations. We'll need a real food source." Liam tackled the problem of storage. The outpost's basement had been flooded long ago, but with Atlas's help, they discovered a second, smaller cellar carved into the hillside 30 yards away. The door was buried under decades of soil and moss, but once uncovered, it revealed a cool, dry chamber perfect for storing food and supplies. Liam reinforced the beams, lined the walls with stones to keep rodents out, and installed makeshift shelves. It was during one of these excursions that they met their first neighbor. On the 4th day of construction, Atlas began barking furiously at the edge of the clearing. Emerging from the tree line was a man in his late 40s, rugged and weathered, with a thick beard and streaks of gray running through his dark hair. He wore a patched canvas jacket and carried a handmade spear tipped with obsidian. His name, he later told them, was Owen McCrae, a former forest ranger who had gone missing more than a decade ago after a personal tragedy drove him into self-imposed exile. Owen was wary at first, his deep-set blue eyes scanning their setup with suspicion. But he was not hostile. Years of solitude had left him quiet and deliberate, a man who measured words like rations. Gradually, over shared meals and cautious conversation, he told them his story. His wife had died of cancer in the city, and the grief had broken something inside him. He'd come to Cedar Vale seeking silence, only to discover that silence had its own demands. He'd been living off the land ever since, using knowledge from his ranger days to survive. His presence was a revelation. Owen knew the forest intimately, where the rivers froze last in winter, which plants were safe to eat, and which caves offered shelter during storms. He showed them how to weave pine branches into insulation mats, and how to smoke fish so it would keep for weeks. More importantly, he shared maps he had drawn by hand over the years, detailing landmarks and dangers they would never have known. "You're not the first to try making a life out here," he said one evening by the fire, "but you might be the first who's meant to." With Owen's help, their small base transformed rapidly. A rain catchment system was added to the cabin's roof. A secondary shelter, built from salvaged planks and reinforced with cedar beams, became a workshop and storage space. Liam constructed a signal mast from scrap metal and solar wiring, capable of transmitting a rudimentary radio beacon should they ever decide to call for help. And every day, Atlas continued to surprise them, finding new caches of abandoned supplies, medical instruments, geological tools, even a half-functional weather drone that Liam repurposed into a perimeter sensor. By the time the first frost appeared on the ferns, the outpost had evolved from a forgotten ruin into a functioning homestead. Their water was clean, their food supply growing, their power stable. The cabin no longer smelled of rot, but of wood smoke and fresh bread. Nights were no longer haunted by fear of the unknown, but filled with the comforting rhythms of domestic life, chopping firewood, tending the garden, repairing tools by lantern light. One evening, as they sat by the stove with Atlas curled at their feet and Owen sketching something quietly in his notebook, Emily looked around the room and felt something shift inside her. "I thought survival meant waiting," she said. "Waiting for someone to save us. But maybe it means building something worth saving." Liam nodded, his eyes on the dancing firelight. "And maybe," he said, "it means this is where we're meant to be." The first hint that something extraordinary was happening came quietly, almost too subtly to notice. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden miracle, but a series of small, undeniable changes that, once pieced together, painted a picture far bigger than Liam or Emily could have imagined. Liam had been chopping wood near the edge of the clearing when he paused mid-swing, realizing his shoulder, a joint that had ached constantly since a climbing accident years ago, no longer hurt. At first, he dismissed it as adrenaline or sheer distraction, but that night, when he reached for a heavy crate and lifted it effortlessly, he knew the explanation ran deeper. "Emily," he said, testing his range of motion with a mixture of disbelief and awe, "I think my arthritis is gone." Emily smiled knowingly. Her own recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The respiratory issues that had plagued her for months were gone. Her breathing was deeper, steadier, her skin flushed with the color of health. Even Atlas, once prone to stiff joints and slower movements, now bounded across the compound with the energy of a dog half his age. The 6-year-old German shepherd had become almost puppy-like again, his amber eyes sharp, his coat gleaming, his gait springy and strong. It wasn't just survival anymore. They were thriving. The changes set them on a new course of exploration. If one spring could reverse hypothermia, ease chronic illness, and restore vitality, what else might the valley be hiding? Owen McCrae, who had become a close ally since their first meeting, urged caution. "Nature doesn't give gifts without balance," he warned one evening as they shared a fire. His weathered face, lined with the weight of solitude and loss, was serious. "If there are more springs, they might not all be safe." but curiosity was a force neither Liam nor Emily could resist. Their search began with Atlas once again acting as guide. Over the weeks, they had learned to trust the dog's instincts implicitly. He had an uncanny ability to find things they hadn't even thought to look for. Hidden caches, old trails, and now, possibly, more springs. On a misty morning in late September, he set off toward the North Ridge, nose low to the ground, tail held high. The journey took them deeper into Cedar Vale than they had ever ventured. The forest grew denser, the ground spongy with centuries of fallen leaves, and the air was filled with the distant calls of unseen birds. After several hours, the terrain began to change. The soil underfoot grew warm, and steam curled from vents hidden beneath ferns. Then, in a shallow ravine, they found it, another spring, smaller than the first, its waters milky white and edged with deposits of calcite. A quick test revealed high concentrations of calcium, magnesium, and strontium. Minerals known to support bone growth and repair. They named it the Joint Spring. Liam dipped his hands into the warm water and felt the dull ache of his old injuries ease further still. Their second discovery came 2 days later when Atlas led them to a spring tucked beneath a massive oak, its waters tinted a faint reddish-brown. The metallic scent hinted at iron and copper, and the readings confirmed it. They called it the Blood Spring, theorizing that its properties could aid in circulatory health and energy. Emily, who had been feeling fatigue after days of trekking, drank cautiously from the source and felt a surge of vitality within hours. The third spring revealed itself in a grove of birch trees, its surface shimmering with a thin, oily film that reflected rainbow hues. This one was rich in zinc and silica, elements essential for skin regeneration and wound healing. "The skin spring," Emily declared, laughing as she dipped her hand into the water. Within a day, a scratch she'd received while clearing brush was nearly invisible. The fourth was the most elusive. Atlas led them up a steep slope to a hidden plateau, where steam rose from fissures in the rock. The water here was cool, not hot, and crystal clear. It tested high for lithium and trace rare earth elements associated with neural function. They named it the Mind Spring. After soaking his hands in the water, Liam noticed his focus sharpen and his usual midday fatigue vanish. Together, these discoveries completed what they began calling nature's lifeblood, a network of healing springs that seemed almost designed to sustain life in every possible way. And they weren't the only ones benefiting. One evening, as the sky burned orange with sunset, they spotted a red fox limping toward the Joint Spring. Its hind leg was mangled, likely from a trap or a predator's attack. The fox circled warily, then stepped into the shallow edge of the water. Days later, they saw it again. Running, whole, the limp gone. Soon, it wasn't just the fox. Deer with torn flanks, raccoons with infected wounds, even a great horned owl with a broken wing, all found their way to the springs. Owen, watching from a distance, shook his head in wonder. "They know," he said softly. "The forest knows what heals it." Word, though they couldn't fathom how, seemed to spread among the wildlife. Animals they had never seen before began appearing near the springs. Bears came to soak arthritic joints in the milky water. Birds gathered near the Mind Spring to drink. Once, they even spotted a wounded coyote limping toward the Blood Spring, dragging a paw that later showed no sign of injury. These sightings changed everything. Emily began recording the animals' visits meticulously, creating a logbook that tracked species, behavior, and outcomes. Liam developed a more advanced filtration system to collect samples without contaminating the water. Owen constructed observation platforms camouflaged among the trees to allow them to study the animals without interference. it became clear that this was not just a geological anomaly. It was a living ecosystem of healing. But their discoveries also carried an undercurrent of unease. The springs were powerful, perhaps too powerful. What if they attracted not just animals but people? What if the wrong kind of attention found them? The trio agreed to keep their findings secret for now. Only the journal would hold the full details, a record for future generations, if there were any, to study. One crisp autumn night, they sat together outside the cabin, the stars spilling across the dark sky. "We came here trying to survive," Emily said, gazing toward the glow of steam rising from the valley. "Now we're caretakers of something far bigger than ourselves." Liam nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We've built a life here. But maybe our purpose isn't just to live, it's to protect." Atlas stirred at their feet, ears twitching at the sound of a distant howl. He rose and padded to the edge of the clearing, watching the shadows shift among the trees. Whatever lay ahead, whether it was months, years, or a lifetime, this place was no longer a prison. It was a sanctuary. And they were its guardians. The storm announced itself days before it arrived. The winds came first, whispering through the pines in uneasy patterns, carrying a metallic taste that clung to the back of the tongue. Then came the pressure, a heaviness in the air that made every breath feel measured, deliberate. Owen McCrae, seasoned by years of living with the forest's moods, was the first to speak the word aloud. "Flood," he said grimly one evening as they gathered around the stove. "A big one, the kind that reshapes rivers and takes trees with it." By then, the sky had turned the color of wet iron, and the rain had begun in fits and starts. Within a day, it became relentless, pounding the canopy and carving new streams into the ground. The first sign of real danger came when Atlas started pacing the perimeter, whining softly, a sound Liam and Emily had learned to take seriously. The German shepherd, now in the full vigor of renewed youth, stopped suddenly and barked toward the south ridge. Liam followed his gaze and felt his stomach drop. The usually placid creek that bordered their camp was no longer a creek. It was a surging brown torrent, swollen to 5 times its width and rising fast. "Get everything above ground!" Liam shouted. They worked with a practiced urgency born of months in the wilderness. Emily rushed to the storage cellar, hauling crates of dried vegetables, grains, and canned goods up the slope to higher ground. Owen reinforced the cabin's foundation with stones and sandbags, while Liam climbed onto the roof to secure the solar panels against the howling wind. Atlas darted between them, barking warnings whenever a tree branch snapped or a wall of water threatened to breach the perimeter. At one point, he grabbed the sleeve of Emily's jacket and dragged her back just before the ground where she'd been standing collapsed into a newly formed ravine. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of unrelenting rain that blurred the world into shades of gray and brown. The river rose until it was only yards from the cabin's door. The garden was submerged, but the root systems held, protected by the raised beds they had built months earlier. Their power system remained intact thanks to Liam's quick thinking, and the water channels he had constructed diverted the worst of the flood away from their shelter. By the time the skies cleared, they were exhausted but alive. The forest, however, was changed. Whole sections of it had vanished beneath landslides. Familiar paths were gone, erased by the floodwaters. Yet the springs still flowed, their steam curling gently into the crisp autumn air. They had survived nature's test. But the next test would not come from nature. It began subtly, with Atlas's behavior. Days after the storm, he started growling at the tree line during his morning patrols. At first, they thought it was a bear or a cougar, driven closer by the flood. Then one afternoon, while Liam was repairing a section of fencing near the mined spring, Atlas froze, ears forward, nose twitching. A moment later, voices drifted through the trees. Human voices. Liam's heart hammered as he signaled for Emily and Owen to join him. They crouched low, watching as a group of figures emerged from the underbrush. There were 6 of them, dressed in expedition gear, their clothing far too clean for anyone who had spent time surviving here. At the front was Dr. Charles Mercer, a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s with a commanding presence and the kind of expensive hiking gear that spoke of institutional backing. His square jaw and steel-blue eyes radiated authority, but there was a coldness in his expression that made Liam's stomach tighten. Mercer had been the original leader of the expedition, the man who had given the order to abandon them months ago. Beside him walked Dr. Vanessa Clark, a geochemist in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, auburn hair tied into a severe bun, and a reputation for ambition that often outweighed her ethics. Clark had once been Emily's colleague and mentor, but the look in her eyes now held none of the warmth Emily remembered. The others were younger, assistants, grad students, technicians, faces hardened by the kind of arrogance that comes from believing they had returned as conquerors. "Well," Mercer said, surveying the rebuilt camp with a thin smile, "it seems you two have been busy." Liam stepped forward, his voice steady but cold. "You left us to die." Mercer shrugged. "We assumed you were dead. Most people would be. But now that you're clearly alive, and thriving, it seems we have some business to discuss." Their business became clear quickly. Mercer and Clark had learned of the spring's existence from satellite data and drone surveys after the flood altered the terrain. They wanted access, not for research, not for conservation, but for profit. "Do you have any idea what this water is worth?" Clark asked, her tone smooth but predatory. "Pharmaceutical companies would pay billions. Governments would fight wars over it. We can build a facility here, secure, controlled, and you'll be well compensated." Emily's expression hardened. "This isn't yours to sell. It's part of an ecosystem. Animals rely on it. This land, this water, has existed untouched for centuries." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "And yet here you are, squatting on government land. Without proper permits, you're trespassers." Liam had anticipated this. Over the months, he and Owen had quietly drafted and submitted legal documentation via the satellite link on the old weather drone. The Cedar Vale Basin was now registered as a non-profit biological preserve under Liam and Emily's names. Their research data had been sent to independent scientific boards, and their findings were already being reviewed by several universities. They weren't squatters. They were caretakers. "You're wrong," Liam said calmly, producing a printed copy of the legal registration. "This land is now protected under the Cedar Vale Biological Trust. Any attempt to commercialize it without consent will be prosecuted as ecological theft." The revelation hit Mercer like a slap. "You think a piece of paper will stop us?" he hissed. "It's not just paper," Owen said from the cabin doorway, his weathered face unreadable. "It's federal law, and every minute you stand here you're trespassing on a protected reserve." Clark's gaze darted to Atlas, who stood between them and the springs, teeth bared, his low growl reverberating like distant thunder. "And who's this?" she sneered. "The Guardian," Emily said, resting a hand on the dog's head. "The soul of this place. If you think you can take what doesn't belong to you, you'll have to go through him first." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The only sound was the steady hiss of the springs and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Mercer exhaled sharply. "This isn't over," he said. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Neither do you," Liam replied, "and you'd be wise to remember that." The expedition team retreated into the forest, their promises of legal battles and corporate backing echoing behind them. but the camp remained theirs. They had faced nature and survived. They had faced greed and refused to bend. And now, with the law on their side and Atlas standing watch, Cedar Vale was more than a refuge. It was a sanctuary, one that would remain untouched by human ambition. That night, as they gathered around the fire, Emily looked out toward the springs, their steam rising gently against the night sky. "They'll be back," she said quietly. Liam nodded. "Then we'll be ready. And this time, they'll understand. This place isn't just ours. It belongs to something far older, far greater." Atlas lifted his head and howled into the darkness, a sound both warning and promise, echoing through the valley like a vow. The years that followed were not measured by calendars or clocks, but by seasons, migrations, and the quiet rhythms of the forest itself. What began as a desperate attempt to survive in Cedar Vale had evolved into something far greater, something enduring. Liam and Emily Carter, once abandoned and forgotten, were now known, at least in scientific circles and among a growing network of environmentalists, as the founders of the Sanctuary of Cedar Vale, a living testament to the possibility of harmony between humans and the natural world. The transformation did not happen overnight. It began with small acts, each one born of necessity and nurtured by purpose. The biological preserve they had registered during their confrontation with Dr. Mercer slowly gained recognition. Research journals published their findings on the unique mineral composition of the springs. Conservation groups reached out, eager to collaborate. And when satellite images revealed the flourishing biodiversity within the sanctuary's borders, even government agencies took notice. Yet Liam and Emily never allowed the project to become commercialized. The sanctuary was, and always would be, non-profit, a refuge, a bridge between two worlds. The sanctuary grew. Wooden walkways were built over delicate ecosystems to allow visitors to study the springs without disturbing them. Small observation huts dotted the hillsides, providing safe vantage points for researchers and conservationists. A modest research center, constructed from sustainably harvested timber and powered by the same solar systems Liam had once cobbled together in desperation, became the heart of their operations. Emily oversaw its daily work, training a small team of biologists and environmental scientists who shared her devotion to preservation. Liam, meanwhile, focused on infrastructure and long-term planning, often disappearing into the wilderness with Atlas by his side to map new territories and monitor the health of the land. The sanctuary's mission was clear. No one would profit from Cedar Vale's gifts. Those who came were students, researchers, healers, and caretakers. People suffering from chronic illnesses traveled here, not for miracle cures, but for the chance to study and understand the spring's restorative properties under careful supervision. Injured animals were brought in from far beyond the valley, treated in the wild rehabilitation zones that Liam and Owen designed to mimic their natural habitats. The line between science and spirituality blurred here. The sanctuary became more than a place. It was a living philosophy. Atlas remained at the heart of it all. The once abandoned rescue dog, now graying around his muzzle but still strong and steady, had become the sanctuary's most beloved presence. Visitors marveled at his uncanny ability to sense which spring a patient, human or animal, needed most. A young woman named Dr. Marissa Lynn, a veterinary neurologist with long jet black hair and gentle, almond-shaped eyes, was among those most fascinated by him. Marissa, originally from Seattle and in her early 30s, had dedicated her career to studying the neurological impacts of environmental factors on animal healing. Her demeanor was calm and thoughtful, her voice soft but authoritative, shaped by years of working with traumatized animals in rescue shelters. She believed Atlas's instincts weren't just behavioral. They hinted at something deeper, an almost intuitive biofeedback response that science had yet to fully understand. "Watch how he chooses," Marissa would say to new interns, as Atlas guided a limping deer to the joint spring or coaxed an injured eagle toward the mind spring. "He's reading them, not just their bodies, but their needs." Emily often joked that Atlas was more accurate than any diagnostic tool they had. Liam simply called him the guide. But time, relentless and impartial, continued its slow march. One crisp autumn morning, years after they had first set foot in Cedar Vale, Atlas failed to rise from his bed by the cabin window. His breathing was shallow, his once bright eyes clouded with age. Liam knelt beside him, resting a weathered hand on the dog's fur. "You've done enough, old friend," he whispered. Atlas's tail thumped once, gently, as if in agreement. When the sun crested the ridge, the guardian of Cedar Vale slipped peacefully into sleep. The loss left a hollow ache in their hearts, deeper than either of them expected. Atlas had been more than a companion. He had been their protector, their partner, the soul of the sanctuary. Emily wept quietly under the ancient cedar tree where they buried him, his favorite place to rest during long summer afternoons. "We would never have made it without him," she said. Liam nodded, unable to speak, knowing the truth of it ran even deeper. But Cedar Vale, like nature itself, was always moving forward. Months later, as winter retreated and the first buds of spring pushed through the forest floor, life brought them an unexpected gift. A litter of wild-born puppies appeared near the edge of the sanctuary, following a small, scrappy German Shepherd mix who bore an uncanny resemblance to Atlas. One pup, in particular, captured their attention. Curious, fearless, with eyes that mirrored Atlas's same amber spark. They named him Echo. Echo grew quickly, bounding through the forest with the same intuitive grace as his predecessor. Visitors swore they saw Atlas's spirit in the young dog's movements, the way he paused to sniff the air before choosing a trail, the way he sat patiently beside injured animals, as if offering silent reassurance. It wasn't long before Echo took up Atlas's old role, guiding humans and animals alike to the springs, as though continuing a story written long before his birth. The sanctuary's reputation continued to spread. Documentaries were filmed, and books were written. Scientists published groundbreaking research based on data collected from the valley. But for Liam and Emily, none of that mattered as much as the quiet moments. The sight of a fox limping into the clearing and running free days later, the sound of a child's laughter echoing across the water as her chronic illness eased in the mineral-rich steam, the sight of Echo leading a wounded elk toward healing. These were the moments that defined their legacy. Owen, now older and moving slower, often sat by the fire in the evenings, watching the stars blink to life above the treetops. "I used to think this place was a prison," he said one night, voice raspy with age. "Now I see it's a cathedral." Liam, his hair streaked with gray, and his once calloused hands softened by years of stewardship, nodded. "We didn't build a sanctuary," he replied. "We just listened to what the land was telling us, and followed." Emily, ever the scientist and dreamer, added softly, "And in doing so, we became part of something that will outlive us." Years later, when they were gone, their names would still be spoken with reverence by those who came to Cedar Vale. But perhaps the truest legacy of all was not written on plaques or in papers. It walked the trails on 4 paws, guided the lost, comforted the wounded, and carried forward the spirit of a dog who had once saved 2 abandoned souls. Atlas had begun the story. Echo would continue it. And the sanctuary of Cedar Vale, born from betrayal, forged through resilience and sustained by love, would endure long after the last page was turned. In the heart of Cedar Vale, what began as desperation and betrayal transformed into something far greater. A sanctuary not built by human hands, but guided by a force beyond understanding. Maybe it was nature's wisdom. Maybe it was the earth healing itself. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the hand of God, quietly weaving miracles into the soil, the water, and the beating hearts of all living things. Liam, Emily, and Atlas didn't create the miracle. They simply opened their eyes to see it. And that's the lesson for all of us. God's blessings are not always thunderclaps or parting skies. Sometimes they're small, steady streams of grace flowing beneath our feet, waiting for us to notice. In our daily lives, we often rush past these quiet wonders: the kindness of a stranger, the loyalty of a pet, the healing power of time, love, and faith. But when we slow down, listen, and trust, we realize that miracles are not rare, they're everywhere. And just like Liam and Emily, we are called not only to receive them, but to protect them, nurture them, and share them with the world. May this story remind you that God's grace is alive, in nature, in love, and in every second chance we are given. If you believe in the power of faith, compassion, and the miracles hidden in everyday life, we invite you to become part of our growing community. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Comment below with a miracle you've witnessed, big or small. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate faith, love, and the unshakable bond between humans, animals, and the divine. May God bless you and your loved ones, guide your path, and remind you, even in the darkest wilderness, that miracles are always closer than you think.